Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Game Industry Legends program. My name is Chris Melissinos, and I'm the Principal Evangelist for the video game industry at AWS. And it is my privilege to have with us on the program today the president of the Tetris company and a pioneer in the video game industry, Henk Rogers. In the 1980s, Rogers brought role-playing games to Japan with his very first video game, the Black Onyx, developed for the NEC 8801 PC, and was the start of his company, Bulletproof Software, now known as Blue Planet Software. Working with companies like Electronic Arts and Nintendo, Henk and his company worked on multiple titles before he discovered a little-known game called Tetris and turned it into an international phenomenon after intense negotiations with the Soviet Union and Nintendo. His efforts helped establish the Game Boy as a market leader and made Tetris one of the most popular games of all time. Rogers' story became folklore in the gaming industry and is the subject of the 2023 Apple TV Plus film, Tetris. Today, Rogers is the founder of 10 companies and nonprofit organizations focused on renewable energy, space exploration, and ending the use of fossil fuels on Earth. A near-fatal heart attack in 2005 made Rogers identify his true missions in life and led him to the founding of the Blue Planet Foundation, a nonprofit organization that has been instrumental in implementing renewable energy policies in Hawaii. Realizing this model needed to be exported to the rest of the world, Rogers, in 2021, founded the Blue Planet Alliance, an organization helping island communities disproportionately affected by climate change transition from being reliant on importing fossil fuels to using 100% renewable energy. Today, Rogers continues to be an influential figure in both the gaming industry and the sustainable energy sector. He has received numerous awards for his contributions to both fields, including being inducted into the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences Hall of Fame in 2008 and named CEO of the Year by Hawaii Business Magazine in 2015. Please welcome to the Game Industry Legends program, Henk Rogers. We have a lot to talk about today, and I'm super excited to have with us on Game Industry Legend, Henk Rogers. And so, Henk, when we talk about legends, your story truly is legendary, apart from the work that you've done in the games industry. But, the new movie completely kind of reinvigorating the story for generation that maybe have not heard it before. But before we jump completely into that, I want to take us back a little bit and talk about your journey into video games. So once again, thank you so much for joining us from Seattle this morning, and it's a pleasure to have you on.
Well, let's go back. So I was born in the Netherlands, and I lived there until I was 11, and then the family moved to New York, and I learned how to speak English, actually. Went to junior high school and high school in New York.
Now, hold on. You went to Stuyvesant, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Stuyvesant. And Stuyvesant was where I first got to touch a computer. We're talking about 1970. We're talking about punch cards.
Yeah.
We're talking about giving a stack of cards in, and you would get your answer 2 days later. That's the round trip for a program back in those days.
Yeah.
Fast forward, 72, I moved to Hawaii, spent a year surfing and diving on the North Shore of Hawaii.
Not bad.
Oahu. And then to be able to get access to a computer, I ended up going to University of Hawaii. First night school, then day school. I majored in computer science and I minored in Dungeons and Dragons.
Like many of us did back in that era, right?
And we had a club called ARG, the Alternative Recreational Realities Group of Hawaii.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I absolutely love that. But so real quick, the reason I brought up Stuyvesant was I grew up in Flushing, Queens. So in basically kind of the same era. I was in, an era of the 70s, and Noah Falstein, which we had on earlier as well, we talked about access to computers during that era, especially kind of like in the inner cities and stuff like that. And so, this going to New York, and I used to hang out down at Stuyvesant as well, back during the breakdancing, days of the early 1980s. I know, I don't look like it now, but yeah, I could hold my own. But the thing is, we did, I think, more so than a lot of my contemporaries, I would say. We had access to computers in a way that a lot of kids didn't, right? In New York and stuff like that, right? They were really ones to really heavily invest in that stuff. And so while my first programming memories were on like trash 80s, in the school, it certainly wasn't punch cards. How did it feel when you first got your hands on this machine that you could imbue it with the thoughts and the stories that you wanted to tell, have these punch cards, and then have it spit back out the result? Like, how did that feel for you?
It felt like I'd discovered a mental bulldozer. It's like you go from like having a shovel and moving little piles of sand or dust, dirt, whatever, to all of a sudden be able to move mountains. My very first program written in Fortran was calculating the speed at which a rock is falling at each floor of the Empire State Building as you drop it.
Nice.
So, and it's like, oh my gosh, this would have taken me so long. I would have had to do, a calculation for each floor, whatever. And here it is, just bang, it's all of a sudden it's all there. And it just gave me the feeling that computers were like, wow, they were like mental bulldozers or something like that. And I still feel that way. I would be a coder today if I hadn't like gotten sidetracked by having to run businesses.
Well, and design. And we're going to talk about some of the design work that you've done over the years. All right. So your family moved there. You were growing up in New York, got your first taste of the magic of computers and the possibility of what they could be.
By the way, my first stop in New York was Flushing. We lived in Flushing.
Okay. Do you remember where?
I don't remember where. I was 11 years old, didn't speak English.
Because I was right off of Northern Boulevard, and where Flushing Cemetery was and Casino Park, like you could see that from my house, so Flushing wasn't too big.
I played baseball in Casino Park.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I literally walked. It was 4 blocks away from my house, Casino.
Got it.
Look at that.
And okay. There was a lot of stuff. Then Flushing, then Jackson Heights, then Corona. I went to Our Lady of Sorrows. I mean,
yes,
I was like something from the Blues Brothers.
That's right.
God.
That's right. And you got done with school, and you walked down to Corona Ice and got a Corona Italian Ice, and you sit in the park and watch old Italian guys play bocce in the park and stuff like that. Those are my memories of growing up, kind of in the same era, same space. So.
High school was I lived in the city. I lived on 46 West 96th Street.
Nice.
And I used to take the A train to go to school every day. And then the Canarsie 14th Street and First, or the school's on 15th Street and First. Yeah, those were the days. We protested against the war in Vietnam, and gosh, it was formative years.
Yeah.
70s. It was a great time.
Absolutely. It really was a great time. And again, these massive seismic changes that were going to be happening to society at the hands of computers and technology and connectivity. So we got to observe it from a vantage point that really allows us to place a lot of stuff in historical context. And so for many of us, our first notion of what computers could be were around games, right? And about storytelling, about those possibilities. And that leads us kind of into, you moving out to Hawaii and going to college and starting to play Dungeons and Dragons. And then that inspired you to build. So from there, you moved to Japan.
Let me take the story from there. So I went to, I had no intention of taking any core requirements because I was just not interested in paying for that. that was because I worked my way through school, and they called me in, and they after 3 years, and they said, "Mr. Rogers, what are you doing?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, you haven't taken any of your core requirements." And I said, "Well, I've already been to high school, so I don't think I need to take my core requirements." And they said, "Well, if you don't take your core requirements, you won't graduate." And I said, "There must be some mistake. I'm not here to graduate. I'm here to get an education. And
Yeah.
I've already got my education. Thank you very much." And I chased the girls to Japan and lived in Japan in the country, worked for my father for 6 years, which in the gemstone business, believe it or not.
Mm.
And finally, personal computers came out. And when personal computers came out, I said, okay, I can do something on this machine.
Yeah.
I got my hands on this is an 8-bit computer now, 64K. And I go to Akihabara, the electronic center of Japan,
Right.
find out what software is selling, and it's game software. First of all, people buy this machine saying that I'm going to learn how to program with this, that, and the other thing, but actually they're playing games.
Of course.
And so I looked at all the games that were there, and it was pretty much the US games made into Japanese games, except that there were no role-playing games, none, zero. And so I said, okay, well, I can do this. Little did I know how little 64K was.
I know.
I'd only done homework assignments up till then. And my vision was, to have a warrior, a magic user, a cleric, and all these, and an arena where we could actually battle and blah blah blah. And I was thinking I was going to make this game when I could only fit this game.
Yes. Yes.
And so the magic, I would say, of that experience was that I basically eliminated parts of the game that were not core to role playing. So what I was left with was the essence of role playing, meaning going up levels, going on adventures, collecting treasure, buying more armor, that kind of stuff. And I managed to do it all in that. I had a 3D. I actually had a 3D, along the lines of Wizardry, except mine wasn't a wireframe. It was actually solid walls. And basically that 3D, well, I first wrote it in BASIC, and it was so slow. It was like the walls were being painted.
Yeah.
And then this is too slow. So I learned machine language, and I wrote that part of the game in assembler. And then I was just amazed. Are you kidding me? Even at 8-bit assembler, it's just so fast.
Yeah.
It was blinding fast. I couldn't see it being drawn. It's like it was there instantly, the whole thing. And all my monsters and people were graphic. They were based on miniatures.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had 30 different monsters and 50 different heads and 30 different bodies, meaning different kinds of armor or clothing.
Right.
It was all graphic, so there was no inventory. If you bought something, you saw it on your character immediately. And that's basically the only thing that I didn't have graphically is how many potions did you have. So the potion the vial was visible, but you didn't know how many you had. You had to check that to see how many you have.
Yeah.
The rest was it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah.
I worked on it for 9 months, day and night.
When you were trying to squeeze a machine, right? The NEC 8801, right? Or the PC 88, series machines. I think, again, for those of us that grew up in those eras, I was a VIC-20 kid. So we had 5K of RAM in the base machine, right? 3,192 bytes available by the time you got done booting. And my first program, I really remember kind of writing for myself, was doing a character generator for D&D.
Oh,
right? So you could do randomized numbers and all those other sorts of things. And we often, in work that we've done around preservation and video games as an art form, back then we needed to have beautiful illustrations and really detailed manuals. So when you went through those, those additional bits of ephemera, and you played the game, it's like, oh, this character, yeah, is this giant warrior that was painted in this book that I saw. And I read the whole backstory because we didn't have the ability to fully articulate the entire vision. Like you said, you have an idea this big, and then you got to kind of squeeze it down and still retain the essence of what you wanted to create. And what I love is that today, and this goes, to Tetris and its longevity, right? The most simplistic shapes that you could possibly paint to the screen, but still kind of enraptured an entire planet, right? Became part of the fabric, not just of the games industry, but of history and of society. And we're going to dig into that. But going back, so this game that you're referring to is the Black Onyx. Of which
Black Onyx.
That's absolutely right. Thank you for getting that shirt on, buddy. I love it. I love it.
It's actually a recent shirt. There was a fan in Japan, like, I don't know, 6 months ago, who wrote me and asked me if he minded if he made Black Onyx t-shirts. I said, hell no, just give me a couple.
Oh, that's awesome.
So there we go. So that was the thing. This art was done by one of my D&D buddies at University of Hawaii, and he would draw everyone's characters for them. He was like a budding, comic book artist, that kind of thing. That's how he drew. And so I asked him to make me a Frazetta, with the guy standing on top of, a heap of monsters and fighting it off. And, it's funny because we advertised this, and I got a full page ad in a couple of different Japanese computer magazines, and nobody understood what the game was about.
Okay, tell us about that, because in looking at this, and I told you that I played the Black Onyx on an emulator right before doing this, right? So I've seen videos of it. I know the story and everything, but getting to experience that was great, and there was a translation that was done for that. But this game, in what was it, 84 or 85, rose to be like the #1 game in Japan. Like, tell us, like, how does that happen?
So yeah, it wasn't going to happen. What happened was I went to this is 83 when I built the game. I went to SoftBank and asked them to introduce me to a publisher, and he said, you should publish it yourself. All you need to do is get your wife to answer the phone. And of course, that's not true. There was way more to it than that. But anyway, we did self-publish, and SoftBank originally said they would buy 3,000 copies, which was reasonable. We were talking about like $78 per unit. And so I thought, well, that's a good start. But come Christmas, which I had aimed at Christmas, I was thinking we're going to sell a lot because it's Christmas, whatever. Wrong. All of that was wrong. Nobody in Japan understood my advertising. They didn't understand what a role-playing game was. Why not? There was no Dungeons and Dragons in Japan.
Right.
Like in the US, people who play D&D would go onto Ultima or Wizardry. They already knew how to play a role-playing game. They already knew Level Up. They knew all of that. And here, it just sped the game up. But in Japan, nobody knew anything. And so come Christmas or come December, SoftBank says, sorry, but we can only order 600. And I'm going like, and it's January. And it's like, oh my gosh, we're like dead in the water. And so I said, I got to do something here. So I asked my guys, so where do Japanese people find out? I didn't speak, read, or write Japanese, just so you understand.
Okay.
None, zero. And so I said, where do Japanese people find out about computer games? I said, well, they find out in the magazines. I said, well, how do you get into the magazine? I said, well, you have a hit software, and then they come and interview you, and that's how you get in the magazine. I said, well, that's obviously not happening here. So I said, okay, you know what we do? I'm going to go to every magazine and show them how to play a role-playing game, which I did. We had a month later, we had rave reviews in every magazine in Japan. And then in March, SoftBank came through with their first order, 10,000 units. We went from 600 to 10,000. And then it was 10,000 a month every month. Not only were we like the #1 game in sales, we were the #1 game in software rental.
Really?
Can you imagine? Software rental came up. It's like record rental. You could rent a record and then put it on your cassette tape, and then you could give the record back. So you're buying the song at a fraction of the price. And again, the same thing with the computer games. You would rent a game, you would copy it, then you would give it back, and then you would have a copy of the game. So I probably have 10 times more people playing my game than games were actually sold, because I was number one in software rental.
So you basically, not to put too fine a point on it, you were one of the first people to actually figure out what the influencer model looked like, rather than being the publisher and kind of holding, court with people that were trying to bang to understand what you were doing. You were like, no, the magazines are the ones that are influencing the sales. I'm going to cut through all of that and elevate them, right? Let's go meet them where they live. Let's go ahead and teach them. So that was an incredible foresight.
It was really exciting. It was like, are you kidding me? Once the game started selling, then I actually had a company. And by that time, I was, already working on the sequel. Mm-hmm. So I was spending all of my time coding again. I'd hired somebody to do the coding. They ran out of memory in a month. I said, what? Are you serious? And then he hadn't done 10% of the game. So I rolled up my sleeves. I said, this is ridiculous. You've obviously spent too much memory in the wrong place. And so I analyzed everything. And there was a well in town where you could go and get refreshment for your potion. Well, that well took up 10K. I said, that's not worth 10K in the story. You have to think about how much is this piece of code or this graphic worth in the entire scope of the game, and that determines how much memory you devote to it. That well was maybe worth, I don't know, 500 bytes or something at most. It became tiny. It's just functional. You can see what it is, but it's not going to take 10K. All of my monsters took 10K, and all of my people graphics took 10K.
Oh, geez.
Just to get you an idea.
Yeah. Ed Fries, one of the creators of the Xbox and founder of Microsoft Game Studios and all this stuff, he would often say that writing games for limited systems is like writing poetry. Like every syllable counts, right? Every word counts, right? So, all right.
I had somebody actually write a piece of code that looked for extra bytes. In other words, squeeze program.
That's right.
That program found 3 bytes in my program.
Oh my goodness. Oh, see, now that's a massive achievement in and of itself.
And then the 3 bytes were, I normally, if you jump to another line in code in BASIC, you say go to.
Right.
And in the case of the BASIC for 8801, you'd have to say go to and then put a little asterisk, and then that's your label. Oh. And so what happened is when your last character died, it would say go to hell. And hell would be a syntax error. And so hell is 4 characters. So there are 3 extra characters in hell. It should have been go to H.
Right.
Those are the 3 bytes.
Wow. All right, so you only had to have...
I put that in as a joke for anybody who hacked into my program later. And we did have, programmers to, how can I say, move it to other machines.
Right.
And they come back and say, what does it mean, go to hell? It's a syntax error that goes back to the beginning of the program.
And an in-joke and a mini code Easter egg, all of those things. Yes, okay, so the Black Onyx blows up. You started Bulletproof software in the back of this, and then you had done some other work for other companies. I think one of the first ones that your company had done was work on Mule, which was Dan Bunton's game from EA.
Yes. Yeah, Mule and Archon. Yeah. And so basically, I made the first 2 games for the company, and then I realized that I had a whole staff of people doing marketing and sales. And I only was able to produce 1 game a year. So my marketing and sales guys were pretty, how can I say, my marketing guys were like doing nothing for most of the year. And so I decided I want to fill up the rest of the year with product. So I started traveling around the world looking for games. And yes, I licensed 2 out of the 4 original Electronic Arts games, and that's Archon and Mule. Both amazing games. Are you kidding me? They're so good. They were so good. It was so ingenious. What can I say? Both of those games. But
and Mule's theme song is, I mean, it's exactly.
By the way, have you've obviously played Mule?
Oh,
Trip came to Japan to buy my company. I should have sold it to him, but I was like being hard-headed. I want to grow it, in value more, whatever. And we played Mule, and he had somehow set things up so that he didn't have any food. And I didn't I was the one, I had like monopolized the food. So he couldn't get the bird. I starved him.
So basically, you starved Trip Hawkins to death in Mule.
Yeah.
Congrats, man. That's a good one. That is a good one.
You can ask him about that. It's probably a sore point, whatever.
Oh my god. All right, so Bulletproof Software is now rocking along. There were some other games that across the history of Bulletproof Software that the company worked in, like Faceball 2000, Pipe Dream, Fire and Ice, a bunch of these games, which obviously grew out of the strong relationship that you had built with the Nintendo on the back of Tetris. And as I said, I went ahead and made sure that I got my Game Boy t-shirt out here just for this this conversation. So let's talk about how you kind of discovered Tetris. So you had developed MicroGo 1. Correct.
Okay. All right. So it's called Kyudoban Ego in Japan. Okay. I that's how I established my relationship with Nintendo. I wrote Mr. Yamauchi a fax because I'd read my wife had read in a magazine that he plays Go.
Yes.
And I had, as one, I was getting companies from around the world to submit games, and one of the games that I got was it was a Commodore 64 Go game out of England.
Okay.
Commodore 64 and the Nintendo machine have the same CPU, 6502, same as the Apple. And so because the algorithm was working on the Commodore 64, I knew that the algorithm would work on a Nintendo machine. All I had to do is like throw out all of the graphics, all of the sound, and rebuild that, which is the easy part.
Right.
So I wrote Mr. Yamauchi a fax. I said, Mr. Yamauchi, I can make a Go game for your machine. I'm leaving on Saturday. Could I see you before I leave? I didn't say that I lived in Japan. I just said I was leaving on Saturday. So I write him on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I get fax back. Mr. Yamauchi will see you tomorrow. And so I'm in with Mr. Yamauchi. It's my first meeting in Japanese because I realized my interpreter wasn't really saying what I was saying. So I did it on my own. And Mr. Yamauchi says, I can't give you any programmers. And I said, I don't need programmers. I just need money. So I'm thinking, so he says, how much money? And I was like, wow, this is so fast. I hadn't given any of this any thought. So I thought the biggest number I could think of at the time. I said $300,000. And he reached across the table and I said, deal.
What?
Oh, it was that fast.
Did I say three? I meant 600,000.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it turned out to be a good thing because 9 months later, same situation. Now I have a finished product. I have little ninjas jumping around, moving the ghost stones and so on. And it's like an amazing product. And he plays it once, and he didn't even know how to use the controller.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? He was fumbling with the controller. He handed over to his underling and said, I want to go here. I want to go here. I want to go here. And he played after one game and he wins the game. He says, it's too weak for Nintendo. It's too weak for Nintendo. I said, Mr. Yamauchi, this is an 8-bit computer. It's a miracle that it plays Go at all. This is like the AI problem. And he says to me, it's too weak for Nintendo. Like what? You didn't hear me the first time I said it? So, again, I had to think fast. And so I said, okay, Mr. Yamauchi, it may be too weak for Nintendo, but it's not too weak for my company, Bulletproof Software. Let me publish it. And then he said, what about my $300,000? And I said, I'll pay you back $1 each unit I sell until you get your money back. Deal. That was,
Wow.
and then that's how I became a Nintendo publisher. Because before that, Nintendo was saying to personal computer, you guys don't know how to make Nintendo games. Where, arcade people know how to make Nintendo games, because they were thinking, all of those, 3-minute long, whatever.
Space shooters, right? Stuff like that.
Yeah. So anyway, I was traveling around the world looking for games, and I was at the Consumer Electronics Show looking for games, and there was Tetris. Normally at CES, you stand in line and wait for your turn to play some game, and then you get to play it for a couple of minutes, and then you stand in line for the next game until you find games that you like. Right. Then you go and negotiate. Well, it takes like 10, 15 minutes to stand in line, so you really have to be dedicated. Well, when I realized I was standing in line for the fourth time, I realized I was hooked on this.
Oh, for Tetris.
Tetris, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you though. So there you are at the Consumer Electronics Show, and are you pitching your Go game at?
No, that's in the movie.
Okay. All right. Good.
My Go game in the U.S. No.
Good. Okay, so yeah, and we're going to talk about that because, all right, so you discovered at CES, you find yourself multiple times in there. So I want to tell you about the first time I discovered your story. So there was a book written by David Sheff and Andy Eddy called Game Over, Press Start to Continue. And I discovered this book in the late 90s. I got my signed copy from Andy Eddy. That's a whole other story that I'll share at a different time. But I remember the things that stuck out in my mind in that book really were three, right? The origin story of Nintendo here in the US, and the warehousing, and, the mafia, trying to hijack their trucks and all that stuff. The other one was the rights to Donkey Kong with Universal, and how they went in when Arakawa-san had the flu, and they sat in there to do this. And then the third story, of course, was your story in there. And the one piece that I loved in there that I didn't see in the movie was when Howard Lincoln and you and Arakawa went to meet in Russia. They produced an LCD game. The Russian government produced an LCD game that they were very proud of, and they, Nintendo looked and said, "Oh, this is beautiful," and it was just a ripoff of like Ball or one of their LCD Game & Watches, But the disconnect between Western kind of rights and stuff like that and what was going on there were just completely foreign to them. So rather than say anything, they were just, "This is very impressive, thank you so much." So, so I loved that story about it. All right, so let's talk about walk us through then from the point of discovering Tetris. And this was Mirrorsoft, correct? That was demonstrating this at, or was it Spectrum Holobyte? Spectrum Holobyte. Yeah. So maybe walk us through kind of.
By that time, I've been traveling around the world, so I already knew all of the characters involved. I knew Gilman Louie. Mm-hmm. I know Jim McConaughey from Mirrorsoft. I knew Robert Stein from Andromeda. I knew all of these people. And I'm at the Consumer Electronics Show, and I'm looking at this game, and I'm looking at the copyright notice, and it says, Spectrum Holobyte gets it from Mirrorsoft, Mirrorsoft gets it from Andromeda, Andromeda gets it from Elorg, Electronorg Technica, and Elorg gets it from Academysoft, which is the computer, the Academy of Sciences, I guess. Right. And it's like, okay, first of all, personal computer. So I talked to Gilman about personal computer, and at the time, gosh, how did it go? No, I didn't talk to Gilman. I actually thought, well, rather than talk to Gilman and get it get it that many, I decided to talk to Mirrorsoft. So I started faxing Mirrorsoft, And after so many months of faxing, I finally got a fax back saying, you got the wrong number now. We've already moved this fax. It's like, come on, you could have sent this to me a long time ago. It was another part of the Mirror Group. And then I got a fax saying that Gilman was going to come to Japan and he was going to deal the Tetris rights for the Japanese market.
Okay.
I said, okay, I can deal with Gilman. I knew Gilman. So Gilman comes to Japan, and he goes, first of all, he goes to the biggest software publisher in Japan called ASCII.
Yeah.
ASCII says no to Tetris because it looked too much, it was too retro. This is 1988, and Tetris was too retro. Like, oh yeah, too retro. And so Gilman, I'll take whatever you got.
Hold on, ASCII's like, we're doing 16 colors on a single screen, man, and you want this game?
Yeah, right. It's like, yeah. Okay, so anyway, it was so funny. Anyway, I did a what do you call it? A letter of intent, where I said I want personal computers, all of personal computers in Japan. I want console, and I want arcade, because I thought all those three platforms would be great. And so we started work, right away. I put a team on doing all of the personal computers, and I put somebody on doing the Nintendo version. And 3 weeks later, 2-3 weeks later, Gilman calls me up and he says, I'm really sorry, but the rights that I licensed to you, Microsoft in the meanwhile traded them for blasteroids with Tengen.
Yeah.
Blasteroids? It sounds like a disease.
Yeah. Blasteroids is not one of the finest offshoots of the whole asteroid premise.
Blasteroid. So
yeah,
they traded blasteroids, and Tengen, Atari didn't have any, how can I say, they didn't have any publishing in Japan at all.
Right.
So I don't know why they needed the Japan rights. And then I thought, wait, Atari Games / Tengen, 46% of the company is owned by Namco.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, oh, shoot, Namco's grabbing this game, And so I remember being at a trade show, and I met with, what's his name? The guy who invented Pac-Man.
Oh, I was, yeah, Toru Iwatani.
Yeah, so at that point, we're both like heroes in Japan. So I meet him at the show, and I asked him, so what do you think about Tetris? And he didn't know what I was talking about. So I just dropped it. I said, okay, if he doesn't know, then Namco doesn't know.
Right.
And if Namco doesn't know, that means the rights are available. That's fine. So I dropped the subject, and we talked about other stuff. And so then I started, communicating with, first of all, I said, Gilman, you gotta fix this. This is ridiculous. We have a letter of intent here. Right. So he managed to get me the PC rights, the personal computer rights.
Yeah.
So those came through with Spectrum Holobyte, and it turns out historically those were the only rights anybody had at that point. Personal computers. Nobody had console or arcade or any of those rights. And anyway, I started negotiating with Atari, and eventually they said, no, I'm not licensing it. We're not licensing it to you. I said to my people in the company, I said, I'm going to California. I'm not coming back until I get the rights. Keep going on the development. And so I basically sat in San Francisco until I managed to close that deal. Took me 10 days.
Incredible. And I do have a copy of Tengen Tetris in my collection, along with, of course, there's Tetris on Switch. There is Mickey Mouse's Magical Tetris. There's the Tetris board game. Like, we've got a lot of Tetris, right? All over this house. Yes. Yes. Okay. But all right. So you go there to close those deals, and then tell us about what happens after that? You then have to go and secure you want to secure the rights for console and handheld, and that takes you to Russia.
Okay. So the console. I thought I had the console rights because I licensed it from Tengen at a contract, and you don't suspect that somebody might not have the rights to a game. And generally, you're talking to the creator of the game or the creators of the game in licensing, and the rights are very clear. I did know at that point that nobody had handheld rights, and Game Boy was coming out. And when I saw the specs to Game Boy, I said, "Oh my gosh, this machine needs Tetris." And but by that time, we'd already released our first batch in Japan, and I flew in January to meet Mr. Arakawa. I said, Mr. Arakawa, you should include Tetris with Game Boy. And he said, "Why should I include Tetris? I have Mario." I said, if you want little boys to buy your Game Boy, then include Mario. But if you want everyone to buy your Game Boy, include Tetris.
Yeah.
And then he calls in his advisors and so on, because he's not a gamer himself. He calls in advisors, and everybody kind of agrees. He says, "Yeah, of course." And then you could still sell Mario afterwards and make the money. Every little boy is going to want Mario, right?
Right.
So they decided to pack in Tetris. I made a deal, handshake deal. And meanwhile, I'm talking to Robert Stein. He's the closest to Elorg at this moment in time. And I pay him $25,000 to be my agent to get me the Game Boy rights or the handheld rights to Tetris. And it's like he's like dragging it out for months, but at a certain point, it's been 4 months and he still hasn't really gotten to first base. And then I get a phone call from Arakawa, and Arakawa tells me that Gilman has been there to see him, and Gilman offered him the Game Boy rights to Tetris. I'm going like, what? Okay, Mr. Arakawa, first of all, Gilman came to me last year and offered me all these rights, and then afterwards he told me, "Sorry, I didn't actually have these rights." So I don't know where he's thinking he's getting these rights. He doesn't have the rights. And we made a deal. Let me finish my job. I'm here to, and so then I get really, how can I say? I start faxing Stein every day, and finally he agrees. He sends me a fax saying, "Okay, next week I'm going to Germany to some trade show for a week. Then I'm going to go to Moscow for a week, and then I want you to show up."
Okay.
It just sounded very strange. And I don't know. The combination of Gilman saying that he has rights made me think that Stein was double dealing.
Yeah. That certainly sounds like it.
That certainly sounds like it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I rolled up my sleeve, got a tourist visa, and got on a plane and went to Moscow. That's how that happened. That's the beginning of that whole thing. Now, it turns out that the reason that Stein needed the week is because he had licensed the arcade rights, which he didn't have yet.
Oh my. Okay.
Arcade rights went all the way from, through Tengen, all the way to Sega. I mean, like these are serious companies now.
Yeah.
Getting ready to publish Tetris, and he still hadn't done the deal. That's the part that I didn't know, and I think Gilman was just thinking that he could get the rights to Tetris through the same way that he got the other rights.
Right.
So I made that connection, but it was just because Stein was not able to be honest with me at that point that I blew a fuse and I went. So it turns out I was in Moscow a few days before he arrived. And when we were in negotiation the week after I arrived, Stein was there at the same time. And I found out halfway through the week that Kevin Maxwell was there at the same time.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
Like that's when I found out. Mr. Belikov asks me, Mr. Rogers, why should we do a deal with you instead of a deal with Kevin Maxwell? And I'm like, holy Kevin is here. I'd never met Kevin, and but he was there for the Game Boy rights specifically. And so that was probably the connection. He probably had a conversation with Gilman, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, that's how that happened. So Stein maybe he didn't even know, because Stein and Kevin Maxwell were there at the same time trying to get the same thing and the new.
Okay, so
yeah.
So I assume that the more people you find that are piling onto Tetris, you're like, my instincts are completely correct here, right? That this thing is going to be, why else would all of these huge companies be vying for this thing if they also didn't see this was going to be big? And I'm assuming that part of that had to play into your risk assessment of, now I'm in Russia on a tourist visa, and I'm going to start pressing all this stuff. And like, I have to go ahead and get this deal done. Right.
Well, so when I was in Moscow, I had already on a handshake done one of the biggest deals of my life, which was Arakawa had agreed to pay me $1 million up front and $1 per unit.
Wow.
For Tetris. So that's $1 million deal.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wasn't going to let $1 million deal slip through my fingers because I'm too lazy to get on a plane.
Well, and you also had other considerations too, right? Of the amount of personal kind of debt and reaching out and stuff that kind of was surrounding that, right?
Yeah. So that I didn't know about. I thought that my rights to console were secure.
Oh yeah.
And when I first show up and I show Mr. Belikov, Tetris for Nintendo, I said, I'm the one who publishes Tetris for Nintendo. I'm here to talk about Game Boy. He looks at the package and he says, what kind of machine is this? And I said, it's a console. You connect it to your TV. And he says, we never licensed Tetris for console to anyone. And I'm like,
my.
No. Look, it's on the copyright notice. It goes from Academy Soft to Elorg to Andromeda to Mirrorsoft to Tengen, and from Tengen or to Atari Games to me, to Bulletproof Software. And he says, no, we never licensed it to anyone. And at that moment in time, I had 200,000 cartridges in manufacture. And to get to 200,000, which is $2 million, in those days, you had to pay Nintendo upfront for them to make anything. So I had borrowed $2 million from a bank using my in-laws' land as collateral. All of it. And they had made their money making dumplings. So you imagine $2 million worth of dumplings turned into real estate.
Oh my.
The whole family working for like their entire lives making dumplings, and that was on the line.
Yeah.
So that was a very stressful moment right there in that lobby when and then I called back, what the hell's going on? How come they, and then anyway, long story short, I decided to focus on the Game Boy for that trip, and land the Game Boy rights, and then I would deal with the console rights afterwards.
Yeah. No, like, I mean, clearly the absolute right move. I remember when Game Boy launched here in the US and living at home, and my parents fighting over a Game Boy. And I remember actually when the Nintendo version came out, the TV that the NES was hooked up to was in the basement where my room was. And I wake up one morning on Saturday morning, it's like 7 o'clock in the morning, and I hear this arguing happening outside. I go out and it's my father and my stepmother like fighting over playing Tetris on TV, and I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Like, do some video, So clearly the right move in securing those rights. All right, so tell me about the time you meet Alexei Pajitnov. So
right, so this is this is on my second day So on Wednesday, I meet Mr. Belikov in the lobby of Elorg. That's pretty accurately depicted in the movie. And the following day, I'm in a room, and there is a bunch of people on the other side, and there's me, and Alexei is one of those people, because nobody else in that room understood anything about computer games. They're all Russians, and they're all, according to Alexei, Elorg's main business was being an arms dealer. That's and he heard those conversations about Kalishnikovs in the hallways and that kind of thing.
Oh
so
my.
Anyway, so there is Alexei among all these people. All these people are suspicious. They think I'm a pirate. I've ripped them off. And after so I was being given the third degree, and everybody's asking me all these questions, and I'm just explaining how my business works. This is what we do, and so on and so on. I'm being completely open book. And then, how does a Dutch guy with an American accent coming from Japan have a publishing company in Japan? That just
and you don't speak Japanese, and now you're in Russia.
Like very unlikely story. And but when Alexei first came to a realization that I was actually a game designer before I was a publisher, he completely flipped. He went from being suspicious to, wow, a game designer. He'd never met a game designer before.
Yeah.
I was the first game designer. And so then he started asking me questions, and I started answering questions about game design, the other thing. And wow, we hit it off. I actually added things to his game. I added single, double, triple Tetris. That wasn't in the original game. And I made I'd made it so that there was a break between level 1 and level 2, so that you see the score being tallied, because people didn't understand how they were scoring. And I wanted people to know how you got the score. So there was all that. I changed the game significantly, I would say. And so, yeah, he was intrigued, and he invited me out that evening, or he invited himself to come to my hotel that evening, and we talked about the future of Tetris and so on and so forth. So, yeah, it was pretty much immediate. As soon as he understood that I was a game designer, I wasn't just some, Stein was definitely not a game designer or a gamer or anything like that. He was just a business guy.
He's an opportunist.
He was an opportunist, and there had been other opportunists that had come and asked for Tetris rights, but basically Alexei just ignored them, because they were really not his kind of person.
Yeah. And so for those that are listening right now, the story of Henk and Alexei and how Tetris came in has been told in multiple places. Again, from the Game Over, Press Start to Continue book by David Sheff, to the excellent documentary, Tetris, to, what is it, From Russia with Love. That one came out, which, again, really good kind of distillation of the chronology of your story. And then, of course, you have the new Tetris movie, which was extraordinary. But it's it is the secret agent telling of that story, which I'm sure you loved. I thought it was absolutely lovely. But what I wanted to say is, what I really took away from your story and in every version of this was, there was a lot of money at stake here, and a long history that obviously came true, and you could very easily have walked away with that and forgotten about it. But you really built this, this kinship with Alexei, and it wasn't just about the business. It was recognizing the brilliance of his design and taking care of him too, right? Working together.
Yes. So I made a game myself, so I know what it's like to make a game.
Yeah.
And I if you make a game, I believe that you should benefit from the making of that game, because it was your brilliance that came up with it. And so at the original time, Alexei was just getting nothing out of it. He got some, maybe I think he got a personal computer. He was one of the 10 people in Moscow who had a personal computer. So it wasn't zero. He did
Right.
get something out of it, but it wasn't nearly what, the rest of the world was getting out of it. The
Yeah.
rest of the world was making millions out of this thing, or was going to make millions, and I realized it. Yeah, so I took care of him. That's the right thing to do, first of all.
Yeah.
And by the way, this means that we still control the rights to Tetris to this day,
Yeah.
because we have coming all the way from the author of Tetris. There's so many other games that were created, and they were brilliant games, and they basically, the original author, we don't even know who they are.
Yeah.
Bejeweled, which became Candy Crush. There is an author to that game somewhere.
Yeah.
And he released the game into the public domain early on. And then everybody just copied and copied and copied that game and nobody claims like I'm the one who invented this game.
Yeah. But they all owe this in some ways a debt to Tetris. So when I look at games like Columns, right? So Sega loses the right to Tetris. They come out with Columns. It's a match 3. People forget that it's not. So it is a cross between kind of the same mechanic that a Tetris has of dropping blocks and the match 3 mechanic of a Bejeweled, right? So we continue to build on these things. But you're exactly right that when somebody has that type of invention, art, story, they deserve to enjoy the success that product, that game, that story, that art generates. And so again, through every iteration of or version of the story I've heard about you and your trajectory, the thing that stuck out to me most was not the ethical way in which you conducted your business, but how you treated Alexei and kind of brought him along for this ride and built this kind of, like I said, as two families kind of coming together. And I just admire you tremendously for that. I truly do.
By the way, I'm in Seattle for 2 days, yesterday and today, and I'm having lunch with Alexei today.
There you go.
Whenever we're in the same jurisdiction, if he's in New York or I'm here, every other day we're after dinner having a bottle of wine.
I love that.
And we're not talking about Tetris anymore. I can tell you that. We're talking about life.
Yeah, so, which is awesome.
We're just friends now.
Yeah. All right. So before we move on to some Q&A, so people that are watching right now, if you have any questions for Henk, please go ahead and pop them into the chat here. I do want to touch on 2 other pieces. So at one point, Tetris, you had sold the mobile rights, or at least mobile licensing, to a little company called Jamdat.
Okay, so I'll tell you quickly that story. I tried to license Tetris. I formed a Tetris company in '95. I'd made a deal with Elorg. We were partners, and it lasted for about, 7 years, whatever. And during that time, my job was to license Tetris to other companies.
Mm-hmm.
Jamdat was one of the companies, and they basically they were making WAP games.
They sure were.
And we're making WAP games, and I went to them and they offered me $25,000 as a minimum guarantee. You got to be kidding me! I'd already gotten $1 million out of a Japanese company for the rights for the Japanese market, just the Japanese market for mobile.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, nobody gets it. So I rolled up my sleeve and I started my own company called Blue Lava Wireless. We then, I licensed Tetris to Blue Lava Wireless, and for the next 3 years, we had the #1 game in the entire mobile game market. Mm-hmm. So towards the end of that 3-year period, Jamdat went public, and if you're a public company, you want to have the #1 game, and they already knew that they were going to try to sell the company to Electronic Arts, and so they needed Tetris. Yeah. So we went to negotiation, and basically I sold them Blue Lava Wireless for well over $100 million.
Yeah, not too bad.
So it went from $25,000 to over $100 million.
So the reason I brought up this story is I have printed out here a press release from May of 2001. Jamdat Mobile secures funding from Sun Microsystems. At that time, I was the chief gaming officer at Sun.
Oh, wow.
And I sat down and there were all of these different, investment opportunities that came into the company. We sat down and we looked at this little company, Mitch Lasky was running, called Jamdat. Yeah. And we had internal discussions of, what kind of games it's going to be. And, is this going to be J2ME based, right? Because we were doing all the Java stuff and MidP 2.0 and all of those things. And I do remember in the body of this discussion, what about games like Tetris that are going to be there, and like, we're exploring all of those things. Like, all right, so let's go ahead and get in early. Of course, Qualcomm comes in right after. I think we did like $1 million investment. Qualcomm comes in right after, must have done a much bigger one, because literally a month later, like, we're bumped off the front page and it's Qualcomm is now doing this big thing, right? So they were grabbing as much money as they could to go ahead and continue to build up that catalog, do the deal with the EA, make sure they got those rights to Tetris. So as we said before we went live here, we've either been in the same rooms or around the same sort of people, because as big as the industry is, it's still so small for those of us that have been around long enough,
Well, yeah. So, there weren't that many dinosaurs.
That's right. Now you can tell by the color of our plumage, right? Which ones? Exactly. But yours certainly much more awesome than mine. I can pull up that long hair there. All right. So let's also then talk about the work that you're doing today. It's no longer Bulletproof software. It turned into Blue Planet software. And now you're focused really. Your days are now spent a lot, not only on Tetris, which I know the Tetris company, your daughter is the CEO there and runs the company, but talk to us about post-Tetris and the work that you're doing for, in environmental and ecological benefits.
So it's a month after I sold my company to Jamdat. The money is not in the bank yet. It's right on the way. And I find myself in an ambulance with a heart attack. And I'm looking at the ceiling of, they were taking me in for observation. They'd said, there's nothing really wrong with you. But halfway to the hospital, the siren went on. And I knew that the S hit the fan somehow. And I'm looking at the ceiling and say, you got to be kidding me. You're taking me out now? I haven't spent any of the money yet. Like, that is so wrong, let me enjoy it a little bit, and then take me out, whatever. But the second thing I said, no, I'm not going. I still have stuff to do. And in the recovery room, I got to thinking, what did I mean by that? And so then I played it backwards from the actual end of my life. Say I die when I'm 90 or 100, whatever it is. What is it that's going to piss me off if I didn't do anything about it during my lifetime? And so then I started searching for my missions in life. And the first mission came to me in the back of the newspaper. This is in Hawaii now. It says, by the way, we're going to kill all the coral in the world by the end of the century. What's causing that? Ocean acidification. What's causing that? Carbon dioxide. What's causing that? We are. Okay, mission number 1, end the use of carbon-based fuel. And to that end, I started a foundation in Hawaii called the Blue Planet Foundation. And we work to end the use of carbon-based fuel in Hawaii. Right. Now, Hawaii spent at that time $5 billion a year on oil and $1 billion on coal. 30% of the oil is to jet fuel, 30% is to ground transportation, 40% is to electricity. So that's $2 billion worth of oil and $1 billion worth of coal, $3 billion. They're the utility is the biggest company in Hawaii. And our lobbyist versus their lobbyist. And they're saying, no, we can't. There's no way we can do all of, blah, blah, blah. And I'm saying, we have to. And we did all kinds of things. We had like children go door to door and exchange 300,000 light bulbs. So they have a conversation with the adult about energy efficiency and about climate change. We prevailed. We're the first state in the country to have a mandate of 100% renewable energy. Our date is 2045. Since then, 20 other states have copied our legislation, so it's moving across the country. That's one. The second thing is that we changed the business model of the utility, so they make more money by switching to renewables. Guess who's our best friend now? they are moving much faster than we ever thought they could, or they thought they could. We have already reached the 2030 goal of 40% renewable energy in Hawaii today.
Wow.
So what I'm trying to say is that if you have the right incentive, then things move much faster than you think they are.
Yeah.
And so all these people who are saying, oh, we need to get this done by 2050 or whatever, I say, let's just put a deadline in the, 2045 is a good deadline because it's a 100th anniversary of the United Nations. And so let's make that the deadline and then work to bring that date forward. Because everybody can agree, yeah, oh, sure, 2045, we can get it done by 2045. And you could say that the people in charge today aren't going to be around in 2045, so they don't really care about that deadline that's that far out. But if you then incentivize the people that are inside of your jurisdiction to make the right decision, things will move much faster than that. We in the world spend $7 trillion a year subsidizing fossil fuel. $7 trillion.
Yeah.
And even with all of that subsidy, renewable energy is still cheaper.
Yeah.
What if we subsidize renewable energy with another $7 trillion? Oh my gosh.
First, I want to say, before we go into the question and answer, thank you so much for taking time. And I could spend another 3 hours. I mean, we're just touching the surface of your work in the industry, the ton of games, design, and projects that you worked on. So again, thank you so much for walking us through the condensed version of your history, of the things that you've done, and really the impact that you've had, on society and for people who find moments of meaningful interaction and joy through the games that you've been able to help bring to the world. So
not over yet.
yeah, we have a lot left to do, that's for sure. Okay, so first question here comes from John. So what would be the best system to experience playing the Black Onyx on? Would it be the original or?
So probably, the successor to the 8801 was the 9801, which is actually a 16-bit computer. So then we actually had more, I could say, more color, more higher definition graphics, and now we're talking about running it off of floppy disk. The original game actually ran off cassette tape, and so everything was done in a single load. But anyway, so the NEC PC 9801 would be my choice. All right.
I'm going to go and source an emulator for that so we can actually run it if I can't get my hands on hardware. Excellent. The next comment that came in was from Steve, who said Archon was the best. We were talking about, the work you had done. I remember that it was like the fight between black and white and good and evil, and that was kind of the Archon packaging. And I just remember so vividly, they use the record album model, right? Of, we're going to create this packaging that looks like album sleeves that you would get, and you'd open up and there'd be all the art on the inside, and you'd slide the discs out of the pocket just like you would an album, right? So really leaning into that tactile media experience that we grew up with, Yeah, really amazing.
Archon was great. It's a chess game, and when the two pieces come onto the same square, the screen turns into a battlefield, and you'll have a griffin fighting against a giant or whatever it is. And, you could get away with, if you were, good at the hand-eye coordination, you could get away with a lesser demon fighting a bigger whatever on the other side.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like chess. One piece takes the other piece, period. No, you had to fight it out.
Yeah, that reminds me, it makes me think too, like the games like Battle Chess and stuff that followed, right? Basically cribbed from that style of let's zoom into the board, let's see this kind of thing play out. I think the problem with the Battle Chess type of stuff is after you've seen like the 2 or 3 animations had for each death or fight, then you're like, just get me through it so I can get back to playing.
Yeah, and if one piece takes over another piece, it's decided. The result of the battle is decided. In Archon, you still have to battle it out. You don't know who's actually going to win the square.
Right.
that's the start of the battle. But battle chess was just like watching a little movie,
Yeah.
each time. So it's different.
Yeah, it certainly was. Even with the Monty Python Black Knight jokes that they had in there, right? Okay, so the next question comes up from Jamie, and it's one that I had on my list as well. So they said, I'm sure you've been asked a million times, but what is your favorite version of Tetris to play? And Jamie says they still play the Game Boy version to this day and still go back to that one. So what's your favorite version?
Oh my gosh. So
Or I should say the version you return to most often.
Well, those are two different
Give me your
things.
favorite and then the one you go to.
Yeah, certainly Game Boy is one of my favorites. I like the idea of buttons over touchscreen. Tetris is made for a button device, and the touchscreen isn't quite as discrete as a button press.
Correct.
You know exactly when you press that button what's going to happen. My favorite version of Tetris, we actually worked on it internally because every once in a while it felt like they weren't like coming up with like new interesting concepts for Tetris, graphically or sound or any of that. So we decided that we were going to create one version of Tetris internally, and that was called Tetris Zone. And the whole concept was that I believe that once you play Tetris to a certain ability level, that you go into kind of a zone, just like an athlete.
Yeah. And that flow state.
The flow state.
Yeah.
And that flow state, we want to bring you to the flow state and keep you there for a certain amount of time. And during the flow state, it's like you're having an out-of-body experience because you're watching your body playing this game, and your body is playing the game faster than you can think. There's some kind of and then you're just watching yourself playing, and that gives you kind of, it's kind of like an out-of-body experience. But anyway, we were experimenting with that. So we wanted the music to be a certain way, we wanted the interface to be a certain way, and so on and so forth. And then we basically said, okay, all of you licensees that are coming down, you got to do better than this.
Right.
And they all had to go up, and the next version of Tetris had to be better than Tetris Zone. And there was a lot great versions of Tetris that came out after that.
That's awesome. I would say my favorite Tetris game is Tetris DX on the Game Boy Color, because I think it really took everything that was great about the original on the Game Boy and just amped it up a little bit, gave you a little more lateral movement. And it's the first time I cracked 400,000 points on Tetris was on DX. And you hit that flow state where, I mean, you don't even have time to really think. You just see the shape and you know where you're going to start to slide it. Right. And that still is the one I go back to.
Here's what happens. Nintendo comes to me and says, yeah, we want to do Tetris DX. And I said, well, so what are you going to change? He says, well, we're just going to make it color and leave everything else the same. I said, come on, you can't just make it the same game. You've got to add something else. And they go, like what? I said, okay, fine, let me think about this. And in a space of like an hour, maybe two, I came up with Ultra Tetris, which is 3-minute Tetris.
Mm-hmm.
How many lines can you clear in 3 minutes? And then 40 line cleared. So how quickly can you clear 40 lines? 2 things were new ways to compete for Tetris. The Ultra Tetris comes from Japan. The shortest time between two train stations is 3 minutes. And so it's a game that you could play between stations on the Game Boy.
I love that.
That's one. And the Ultra, by the way, there is a character, Japanese giant robot character called Ultraman.
Mm-hmm.
And Ultraman comes down to Earth, and he can only stay for 3 minutes and do his fight, and then he has to go back. So Ultra Tetris is Tetris for Ultraman, so he can actually play and finish a game.
I love before he gets his next train, wherever he's fighting, evil in the world.
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Okay, so outside, well, I should ask you one other question too. You can get to space shuttle launch anytime on original
yeah,
Tetris.
pretty
Yeah.
much. Space shuttle many times.
Yeah.
And have you ever played the heart levels?
Mm-mm.
Ooh, okay. There's a
Mm.
secret button combination on Game Boy.
Oh, everybody listen up. Here we go.
I don't remember what it is. Okay, we'll have
Okay.
to look. We'll have to look it up. But I can tell you that, for example, Ken Lobb will know this because he's the one who showed it to me. Ken
Okay.
Lobb. I don't know where he is now. Last time I looked, he was at Microsoft. But anyway, Ken Lobb showed me the button combination, and then the pieces are falling faster than you can get them to play in the game at all. So they're falling so fast as you can press the button, if you press right, it'll only reach the fourth line. You won't be able
Whoa.
to get above the fourth line on the right or the left side. So all of your game is being played on the bottom four lines. And of course, the trick is, and there's no room to be able to put the long piece on one of the ends. So you have to make the pipe in the middle. And if
Oh.
you can clear one Tetris, you'll already beat everybody's high score. Because the idea is that the game is so fast that you play and you hand the machine over to the next guy, and then they play and then hand. It's a very, very fast game.
All right, I will definitely track down Ken. I'll reach out to Perrin Kaplan if I can't find him. We will go ahead and find that.
Find it.
Okay, I think we've got two other questions left. So outside of Tetris, what would you say your next favorite puzzle game is? Oh, and I'm sorry, and that question was from Carl.
As if my favorite puzzle game outside of Tetris. Um, gosh, I did buy outright the rights to a game called Hermetica, and Hermetica was an arcade game in Japan, and I turned it into what did we call it? But Nintendo ended up licensing it. It's called Yoshi's Cookies.
Yeah, which Bulletproof Software went ahead and did the version for Nintendo.
Yeah. So Yoshi's Cookie, actually Yoshi Cookie they did themselves. We didn't do the programming for that.
Oh, did you do just the publishing then, or maybe assistance on that?
The right to the game because we had published it in what did we call it? Oh my gosh, senior moment here.
That's all right. But you know, it's so funny because that's then obviously it was a different game. It was based on. It kind of reminds me of Super Mario Brothers 2 here in the States, which was different than Super Mario Brothers 2 in Japan, because in the States it was based on a game called Doki Doki Panic that was done in conjunction with a television mascot because Nintendo said, "Oh no." Super Mario Brothers 2 is going to be too difficult for Western audiences. So they never released that here. They released this other game that was reskinned with Mario and the characters. And then later they released The Lost Levels, which was the actual one, right? So there were times when it was, hey, let's take a really good concept. Let's put it around the characters that are most approachable, best understood, all those things. So that's excellent. Excellent. Okay, so were you part of any Tetris World Championships? That's from Steve again.
I not in World Championships. No, I mean, Alexi's original wish was to create a version that could be played by everyone on every platform, and then find out who the best player in the world was. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, all the platforms are so different. That you end up having, how can I say, it's sort of like Le Mans. You can have a F1 racer and a street car racing in the same race. It's just not a fair race.
Yeah.
And so, so we never quite accomplished that. Mm-hmm. What's the platform? If we say let's make it Game Boy, then that's one thing. And I've always wanted to make a version of Tetris that would be open-ended. It would be like it would show off the ability of like an unbelievably good Tetris player.
Yeah.
And I think the best version for that was Tetris. I think it's called Grandmaster. Arika was the name of the company. It's an arcade game. And if you look up the best game on Tetris Grandmaster, it's blinding fast.
Yeah.
It's blinding fast. And he's able to play. The top players are able to play at that level. And then when you get to the very end of the game, you watch the video, then the blocks in the playfield disappear. He is playing without being able to see the blocks in the. He is still playing. He's still clearing lines. Yeah. And the credit scroll is going by as he's playing and still clearing lines when he can't see the blocks anymore.
That's ridiculous.
It's just insane.
It's like watching also people play the rhythm-based games with multiple buttons in there. I mean, you can't even see the notation that's coming. It's all muscle memory. It's all timing, you know, that they learn.
Yeah, except that this is not memory.
Right.
Tetris is random.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah. You never know when the next piece is going to come, what it's going to be.
Yep. All right. So there were just a couple of quick comments here. Donal said, I'm a fan of Tetris Attack. It's so very different. You only swap blocks versus dropping patterns. One of the first video games I ever played. Carl said that played a lot of that back in the day on Super Nintendo. Tetris Attack, such a good time. That was from Michael Purdy. So yeah, a lot of Tetris fans over here as well for the different variants. And I also would like to say too, you know, in closing, I also appreciate the notion of how do you create a single version of Tetris that is kind of equalized across all the platforms. You can then discover, you know, who is the best player. And it feels like, you know, the web, right, with the advancements that we've had in it, especially over the past 5 years and things like HTML5 and access to accelerated hardware and those sorts of things, there may be an opportunity to create, if not the perfect version for every single platform, the same version across the widest number of platforms that people can engage in, right?
Absolutely. You know, that was the first thing that we did when we formed the Tetris company, because up before that, there was no control. I mean, everybody made completely different version of Tetris. So the Game Boy version, the pieces, you have to rotate them while they're falling. But on the Sega arcade version, the piece, you can drop it and then rotate it.
Yeah.
You do your thinking while the piece is in the air, so to speak. And in the Sega version, you do your thinking when it's already landed. Those are different games.
They are.
And so we had to make one version that accepted players from both sides. And that was hard work, but we managed to do it. And that became the standard way that we, I don't know, all licensees have to
adhere to. Adhere to those things. Yeah, because I will say that it may be in Tetris DX, or it may be in the follow-on on the DS, but you'd get into a state where you would have a block that's dropped, and by rotating after it's landed, you could make it kind of grab the block next to it and then flip over into the other one. So you could, even when it was already landed, by rotating it up and then rotating across, it would grab it and hook it. So you can almost tumble the piece left, right, versus just sliding it, which created a whole other set of techniques that, of course, I availed myself of because, you know.
Right. You know, I mean, the idea is that going forward, we want to create opportunities for great players to find new ways of playing Tetris.
Yeah.
You know, that's and then give them score for it. So when you say tennis, you know, tennis was played a certain way. But then when Bjorn Borg came, and all of a sudden he was starting to drive the ball, and it came from table tennis. So he had a different way of playing, putting like topspin on the ball. What a concept there! And then you know, underspin and all kinds of different things happened after that. So I want that same kind of progression to happen in Tetris, where players in the future are doing amazing things because they can.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Henk, thank you so much again for spending so much time with us today. Thanks for everybody that listened in this morning. Obviously, there's a lot more Tetris yet to come. It was an absolute privilege to get to spend time interviewing today and to hear your story. Looking forward to some follow-on conversations about the work you're currently doing. Yeah.
The follow-up conversation is going to be about how I'm gamifying fixing climate change and everything.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm creating a role-playing game that has to do with fixing things in the real world. So,
okay. All right. As soon as we're done here, yes, I have 1,000 things I want to ask. So as soon as we're done here, I'm going to reach back out and get on your calendar for a prolonged conversation about this. But again, thank you again so much for your time, for your incredible stories, for your incredible inventions, and what you help bring to the world. It's made so many people so happy. And yeah, thank you so much for being awesome.
Thank you.
All righty. Okay, gang. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care. Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Aloha.
Aloha.